Welcome back to the Momentous Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Israel. Happy 2026. I hope the holiday season was exciting, relaxing, overall enjoyable. I know I'm recharged for the 2026 year. A lot of exciting things happening here at Momentous Sports and the work that we're doing at the intersection of professional team ownership and real estate. And we are really excited to bring you here on the podcast some fantastic guests here this year. And this is really a place where we bring together deal makers, entrepreneurs, investors, athletes, operators within the asset class of sports. And we're going to kick off the season with one of those owners and operators who just had a very successful season in 2025. And that guest is none other than Roger Loughney. Roger's an American entrepreneur and investor who has built one of what I think is probably the most compelling recent stories in European football or soccer through his ownership of IK Start in Kristiansand, Norway. Roger's journey with IK Start is really a powerful case study in kind of short-term patience, trust, and long-term thinking, taking a club that faced disqualification in 2023. They were actually eliminated from the playoffs or disqualified from the playoffs due to their field freezing. Imagine that. A lower middle table finish in 2024, finishing second in the league in 2025 and receiving promotion. And along the way, the vision expanded beyond football into community impact, infrastructure, and real estate development. Today, we'll talk about his entrepreneurial background, what drew him into European football, the lessons from building trust as an American owner abroad over here in Europe, and how this experience is shaping the way he thinks about sports and sports-anchored real estate going forward. All right, Roger, thank you for joining me. Let's get right into it. First of all, I just wanted to say it's been great to get to know you here over the last couple of months, learning about IK Start. You've been fantastic to communicate with and dialogue. And I've learned from you guys along the way. So I've appreciated the relationship that's been established, and I appreciate you joining us here on the podcast today.
That's been fantastic. It's been great to work with you and Samir and some other folks at Momentous through our mutual connections. It's funny how small the world gets, when you're out there, when you put yourself out there.
Yeah, very small, very small. Especially transatlantically. There's a big world in sports. There's a lot of crossover. So we're going to get plenty into IK Start, but really I'm always interested in kind of the entrepreneurial journey, the human behind, the people that are doing these deals in the asset class of sports. So let's take a step back for a minute and talk to me about your entrepreneurial journey. How did you get into business? You mentioned to me before we started the show that you lived in Germany. How did Roger end up where he is today? And specifically, how did that entrepreneurial journey start?
Yeah, I guess it kind of came from my parents. It just gave me a ton of independence as a kid. I can remember I was 12, 13 years old, and my soccer coach would pick me up from the bus stop, drive me to training, and then I would spend the night at his grandma's house, and then he would drive me back to the bus stop in the morning. He's from Scotland. I couldn't understand a single word his grandmother said, even though she said she was speaking English. And it wasn't English. I was like, what is that? And
I was on a call with an Irish individual the other day, and I was trying to process. He was like, "This is pure English." I'm like, "No, I'm struggling."
Right. So like from there, I spent about 8 months in Germany when I was 12. Playing soccer, going to school, and just kind of had this really big independent streak. My parents encouraged it. Spent some time at the University of Innsbruck. Undergraduate degree from the University of Notre Dame, but spent some time in Innsbruck. Worked in Munster, sort of in northwestern, like central western Germany, and did a stint teaching English in China at the University of Hubei, Science and Technology. So kind of spread myself around the globe a little bit, just always been curious and inquisitive. And that's sort of rolled into my professional life. that same sort of curiosity and what's on the other side of the door.
It's thank you for that context. I have obviously had a number of conversations with team owners, first time team owners. Some were exited founders, others were in the private equity space or fund managers that had moved into the space. Was there a specific entrepreneurial track that you were on that you've moved on from? Is there business outside of ownership of the soccer club that you focus on? Can you kind of paint that picture a little bit?
Yeah. So, the day job currently is in the medical device space. We have a group here in Western Pennsylvania that works primarily in orthopedics. So we have 7 folks on the team here that, any given day we're in and out of the hospitals, a small real estate play, a couple apartment buildings, an investor in a restaurant, nightclub, hotel here in
Okay.
Pittsburgh as well. So it's always been this diverse, finding ways to have a diverse portfolio, diverse set of interests. In case something doesn't pan out or something isn't really fulfilling you, you know,
Sure.
spiritually, psychologically, mentally, financially. Right? There's several components to working for yourself and being on your own that
Sure.
people can appreciate. There's sometimes some lonely moments there, but
Yeah.
that's why it's good, in my opinion, to have a couple different things going on, because one of them should be fulfilling in each of those different aspects.
Buckets. Yeah, I agree. I've had an interesting entrepreneurial journey myself that went from the hospitality space, master franchisee, startup founder, moved into the family office space, now in the investment management space in sports. I tend to agree with you there. A lot of ways to find value in life, to leverage professional work to create joy and value. And I've been on a similar journey over the last 15 years myself, and I've ended up here at the intersection of sports and real estate and sports from an investment perspective, and so have you from an operator perspective and investment perspective. Kind of take me back a little bit. Can you give our listeners kind of the framing of, hey, this is when I started to think about sports investing. This is how this particular opportunity came about, with whatever you're willing to share there. And then, what was it that made you decide, hey, I want to go and participate as an owner, as an operator, be on the board for a sports organization outside of the U.S. and in particular in Norway.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really interesting road, and it also goes way back. Starts back in '89. So I think you're born in around then, right? Plus or minus
85, yeah,
85. Very
85.
cool. So I'm 79. Um, my parents hosted people all the time. We had people from Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Germany, wherever. Just I don't know where they all came from necessarily, but they would spend a couple weeks or maybe longer at our house. And this one summer, a particular gentleman by the name of Mick Priest was coaching soccer camps, football camps for the European audience. And ostensibly, I can only imagine that if you hosted a coach, that there would be some, maybe free admission to the camp or some sort of ways to sweeten the pot if you hosted a coach. And, my dad and mom hosted Mick. Mick was 16 or so at the time. A lot of Europeans and British folks would come over and coach, American soccer camps as a way to make a couple of shekels during their off season as they're trying to make their way in the professional playing world.
Sure.
So Mick came to our house for 4 or 5 years. Every summer became a brother, a son to my mom. We became really, really close. His particular playing career didn't pan out. Ended up playing college NAIA level in Walsh in Ohio, so Eastern Ohio, close to Pittsburgh. And he was at our house every Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring break, summer break for years. I mean, we're talking about 8 or 10 years. Mick was around. He left the States and got a job at Manchester United, coaching their academy. That was sort of his first professional job in soccer and football. He spent about 14 years there. This is Sir Alex Ferguson, Ryan Giggs, Paul Scholes, kind of that sort of heyday of the late 90s, early 2000s, Manchester. And Mick followed, Scholes and Giggs around some stints at Oldham, Fulham, and Mick ultimately ended up in Israel at Maccabi Haifa, where he met a Norwegian guy. And he was like, yeah, there's a cool opportunity in this town of Kristiansand. This is about 2017, 2018. So Mick took the opportunity and went to Norway. And I've always sort of followed Mick's career as a fan. And so he ended up spending 2 years at Start in Norway, 2017, 2018. And then ultimately left Start. He was assistant and interim head coach there, and moved back to Brentford. Unfortunately, my mom passed away, pretty young, and he came back for the funeral. This was just over 3 years ago. And he got to talking to a friend of mine from high school who had been looking into this space more earnestly, more intently. And they happened to just meet at the viewing, right? This confluence of people and events, right? Which is where a lot of these things come from if you're open to finding them.
Sure.
And so Mick was like, hey, your buddy's, got something interesting going on. I told him I'd love to be a part of it from a professional management perspective. So I started talking to my friend Mike, and I was like, Mike, what do you have going on? Mick seems pretty keen on this. And at that point I started to, put some capital together, put a little team together, a friends and family raise to support Mike and his venture. They don't always pan out, right? Mike's venture didn't pan out as he had intended, but I already had this critical mass of, friends and family and a bit of a fund together to give it a whirl. So that's really how this started. My anticipation was sort of minority passive investor in a friend's project, and that quickly morphed into this.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. Give me an idea of, what's the initial reaction? You look at Start, you're trying to, I guess, I'm assuming, understand, like, okay, from an investment perspective, there's a lot of nuance within sports. There's promotion, relegation. There's all these elements. Like when Start landed on your desk, how were you processing what it actually was? And, obviously we'll get a bit into the success in 2025, but what year was that? I know the team was disqualified from the playoffs in 23 due to a frozen field. It's kind of the middle of the table, which is mind blowing to me that that's a thing. I mean, really mind blowing. 24
sure.
Kind of mid table, and then you guys get promotion in 25. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's been a ride.
I'm sure. But from like that kind of like, hey, there's this thing over there, to like, okay, there's some momentum in us pursuing it, to what it's become. Are you more active? Are you more engaged? Are you in a larger role than you would have imagined? Is it like, take me through that?
Oh man. Well, so when I first brought the idea up with my wife, you are in the same boat, first. Right? And you're like, what do you think of this idea? And you hope to get a don't do it. So you could just sort of, cool, we'll just stop right there, right? And unfortunately, the group that we had, sort of our founding group, our wives were like, do it, go for it, right? Like, don't bet the farm, don't risk the house, don't put us on the street if this thing goes to pot. But no, go for it. So we put together a little team. We did a little recon mission in Kristiansand.
What year?
2023, like okay. November of 2023, December 23, somewhere in there. And we went over, and I landed. It was snowing. The Christmas market. It was beautiful, and I was like, oh man, I'm in trouble. Like literally, like. First step off the plane, I was like, I'm in, right? I'm into this. And, then the frozen pitch deal, right? The disqualification from the playoffs happened 2 or 3 days after we got back.
Wow.
And
Wow.
our sort of initial investment group, we had a meeting and we're like, what is going on over there?
Yeah.
But of course we always were like, hey, listen, buy low, right? Get in as things are going down, right?
Sure.
Um, and that's sort of how we looked at it. We're like, okay, look, that's obviously not a great moment, not a proud moment in the history of the club. No, it happened. It's part of it. But from an investment standpoint, from an opportunity standpoint, you're like, all right, cool. Like this can go up, right? Let's
Sure.
catch it while it's going down and see if we can turn it around.
As you all acquired the team, kind of looked under the hood, got into operations, started thinking about what I'm assuming is the 2024 season. Um, what really was there anything that changed in your view? How does that even like what's that look like at the beginning when you're showing up and trying to go like, okay, I own this thing. This thing is a community asset. It's not just something kind of behind a paywall or online that I'm selling a product and I own the business. This thing is a living, breathing organism that people care about, and that now you're a steward of. And you got to get in there and kind of make the necessary changes to kind of move the organization in the direction you want to take it. What was that initial kind of exposure, and where did you start thinking about, hey, here's where we can make the most short-term impact, but here's how we're thinking about building for the long term?
Right. And you hit on a key statement there. Robert Kraft, said it best that, nobody is really an owner of the team, right? We're just stewards of a public good, right? So we temporarily sit in a seat, in an operating seat, in a investment seat, whatever you would want to use. But honestly, we're stewards of a public good. And it's a public asset to the people in that town, in the region, wherever that may be. And this particular club's 120 years old, right? The people who were around the very beginning are long gone, and it's still this good. But so from that perspective, we're like, okay, what needs to be done to sort of stop the slide and restore some pride, some dignity, some optimism to the club, right? It wasn't a function of the people working there. They're all good people, proud people who obviously wanted the best for the club. But the first thing that we noticed there wasn't a lot of communication between the staff, just
Mm-hmm.
because things have been so dire.
Yeah.
Disqualifying from the playoff, and then facing financial sanctioning from the Norwegian Football Federation, point deduction, automatic disqualification, relegation, these kind of things, right? It's very taxing um, on people working there and being a part of it. So our first step and our first goal was, okay, what can we do to create some optimism, to restore pride, to give the people that are on the ground day in and day out, uh, you know, some confidence, and to be able to lift their shoulders a little bit, hold their head up high, and that's kind of really where we started. A lot of the staff who was there saw this as an opportunity to exit, um, just like make a clean break. Like things are obviously going to be dramatically different,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse. So some people self-selected out, and other people decided to stay on and want to be a part of the journey with us.
So much in business in general and in sports in particular is trust, and across the spectrum: investor trust, ownership trust, the trust of employees with the ownership group or management, trust from the players to the coaches and vice versa, and trust from the community, in the ownership. And you alluded to being a steward of something good in the community. What was the experience? I'm less familiar, from my due diligence experience on the ground in Norway and really in the Nordic countries. You obviously know the fandom that exists in England and here in more middle to southern Europe. What was the experience like? Was it getting to know the fan base? Was it open arms? Was it skepticism? Like, how was that experience, and how do you think ultimately, I'm assuming you have, but how do you think any challenge was cured, and or how did you continue to use the momentum of excitement about you coming in? How did that land kind of initially?
Yeah, I was ill prepared for that. I'll
Mm.
be completely honest. And for those people listening who haven't gone through it or maybe interested in looking into operating a club or investing into a club or taking a public or a lead role in a club, it's intense, right? And I did not I did not anticipate it, right? Just it was a ground game, right? It was meeting everybody on their terms in their place, listening, right? Did a lot of listening.
Is that like, who is that with? Is that like with sponsors, local government, team supporters? Like, who are those types of people that are coming, or everybody?
All of it, like all of
Yeah.
it, from everybody from local government officials all the way to the diehard fans that are waving the flags, bringing the flares, banging the drums, sponsors. The question, why do you want to do this? Why should we trust you to do it? The trust is a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Them trusting us and us trusting the folks on the ground, right? You have to have trust, and you have to have some level of intuition or an emotional IQ to, like, all right, this is somebody I can trust, or this is somebody I can't trust. And the level of trust in this transaction is very high.
Was that so? It was a ground game. It was, I'm sure meeting at a few pubs,
A
spending
really, a
extra
really
time.
fun ground game, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you may have been able. I saw some. You created some content and some videos. It looked like a lot of interesting, fantastic experience. By the way, for the audience, if you've never actually heard of Christians on Norway or seen it, you absolutely should. I mean, unbelievably picturesque from the research that I've done, and certainly that was illustrated in the videos. Well, so you kind of go through that gauntlet of building the relationships, earning the trust. There's kind of a reset within the organization. What at that time, you're in the second division in Norway. Again, in 2024, you kind of finished middle of the pack. Like, what were the things going into 25 that were priorities for you all that you thought would lead to success on the pitch, that you kind of leaned into?
Yeah, going back to 2024, we had the coaching situation. We had parted ways with the coach, the sporting director, and the general manager, all basically within a week,
Wow.
in like February of 2024. And we're like, all right, we need all of those things. We need a general manager, we need a sporting director, and we need a coach. So our coach Azar Cardas, he had played high level, played Portugal, Norway, and was coaching sort of at Brann, which is a big club out of Bergen, and he wanted an opportunity to coach like an A team, right? To coach a first team, and he signed a 1-year contract, which is a pretty bold move. Your first head coaching gig, A team coaching gig, you sign a 1-year deal 2 weeks before the season starts
Wow.
with a club that is not headed in any particularly fantastic direction. But he was confident. He has confidence in himself and his skills, and what he could do and he could bring, and he wanted an opportunity. And I give him a ton of
Sure.
credit.
Yeah.
Now, to be 42 years old, to take your first gig, and under those circumstances, that can make or break your career, right? You have your first coaching gig. So we're going through the season. We signed the deal on June 18th, which happened to be my mom's birthday. So this thing started on at my mom's funeral, and ended on her birthday, which is just kind of a crazy bow on the situation. But we were sort of bottom of the table most of the season, the first half of the season. 13th, 14th, 15th position out of 16 teams, and won a couple, lost a few. Then we went on a bit of a tough spell, and the public pressure was on us to make a change. And the easiest thing to do, the most public thing to do, is change your coach, right? That's like a knee-jerk reaction to it, and there was a lot of pressure to do that, and we weren't willing to do that, right? We just thought that that's such a short-term thing to placate, a public situation, right? So
what does that mean? Can I just have to know, like, how does that land? Is that on X? Is that you can see it written in newspapers? It's being covered. There's message boards. Like, how is that showing up? How are you sensing and feeling that?
Yeah, all of those things. Private emails, direct messages, public forums, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The newspaper.
It's not for the faint of heart.
No, I mean the local newspaper is fantastic. They've got some fantastic beat reporters that we work with, and it's their job to sort of dig and find out some info. And they plant certain questions, and they're like, "What do you think of the coach? What do you think of the coaching? What do you think of the direction?" And internally, we were like, "Hey, we're focused on the task at hand. We need to be better. Ask what the team needs. Ask what the players need. Ask what the coaches need, and try to provide that." And ultimately, we stuck with the coach, and as a human being, he's a fantastic guy. And we spoke with the players. We asked the players, what is this a coaching thing? Is this a playing thing? And the players, to a man, said it. We're not performing, and we're not executing to the level that the manager expects and that the coach is training us on. And you could appreciate that as having been an athlete yourself. There's times like we're just not playing well. It's not because of the scheme or the coach, right? It's just we're underperforming. We're running the wrong routes. We got the snap count wrong, right? We had a false start, right? Snap hits you in the hip because you're calling an audible, right? These things happen, right? And that's not a coaching thing. Yeah. And so we stuck by him, and that, I think that was an inflection point for us, because that really built a lot of trust within the room, within the coaching and the players. And you have conversations with the players, like, hey, what do you think of a bunch of of us coming in? What do you think of some American guys coming in and giving it a go and operating this club? Are you for it, against it? And they're behind it. They're like, listen, if we had this opportunity, we would do the same thing. And we appreciate you guys coming in, and we appreciate sticking with the coach. And fast forward to 2025, we promoted, right? So, these things take time, right? And they build from the back. And there's certain moments in time where you feel that you got onto the right track and just had to keep riding.
It's a fantastic story. Really from the genesis of it at your mother's funeral. And my mother passed away in the summer of 23 unexpectedly at a younger age. So I share that understanding and kind of how that moment sticks in your time, kind of into perpetuity, to end up being promoted, which for anybody in this space, like many of our listeners are, but for those that aren't as focused on soccer, over here, there's nothing better.
No.
It is one of the most incredible things about football or soccer, or however we want to frame it here, and use the right language. I mean, that is the goal, but it's also why it's an exciting sport, right? Because if you're at the top or the bottom, really games start to matter down the stretch. Was there anything that you saw, or were there things that you were focused on and thinking about? You obviously have the sporting side and then you have the business side. So if we step away from the sporting side for a second, and you kind of think back through your journey, were there key business initiatives? You have the key revenue categories: ticket sales, sponsorships, in some cases naming rights, et cetera, the general operations, marketing. Were there areas that you think we're improving kind of at the same pace that you saw on the pitch in 25 and that you were focused on from a business perspective?
Absolutely, and that's sort of been more of my focus. Leave the sporting side to the professionals, right?
Yeah.
Professionals we have inside the club, professionals on the field, in the locker room. Yeah, so we mainly were looking at what are the revenue opportunities that we've been missing. I had a lot of meetings, and I continue to have a lot of meetings with the partners, thanking the partners who had been a part of the journey in 2023, 2024, when things weren't necessarily um, smooth, right?
Right.
And the only reason that we're here is because things weren't smooth, right? Things were going great. We're not even in this conversation. But you thank the sponsors, and you say, and you thank the fans, and you appreciate them being part of the club still, helping the club survive through a tumultuous period. But you say to them, like, look, we're not a charity. This isn't a charity. Your investment in the club should return value to you as a partner. And that is our goal, is to add value to your enterprise, whatever your value add or whatever your value prop is. If you're B2C, right, you want some people coming in your door because of the sponsorship, right? If you're B2B, you want a networking opportunity. If you just want to be public with your support of the club and that's value for you as an enterprise, that's great. Whatever that looks like, let's return that value. Let's add value to you. So that was my commitment to the partners, is we're going to have an enterprise that returns value to your investment. And that was my main focus with them. And the same promise to the fans is, like, we want to play meaningful football matches. And I've been at a dozen matches maybe over the last 2 years, and thanking fans on their way out for showing up, thanking fans on their way in. Just it means a lot to me to have the conversations with moms and dads and kids. Some of the first kids I met were 7, 8 years old, spoke perfect English, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Hey, we really want to meet some of our heroes." I'm like, "All right, come with me. We'll take care of that." Like the simple things.
Yes. It takes
That
nothing.
Yeah, it just, the players want to be heroes, right? They want, some want to be public, not all of them, and the fans want to have somebody to support, to look up to, especially the younger ones, and that is where you start to build the value. It's foundational, and it's not nuclear physics, right? But it's not easy, right? It takes time, and again, you have to put yourself out there. You have to be exposed, and not all the conversations with the fans and the supporters are easy.
Sure. Sure. Great learning in those conversations, but definitely not easy.
Yeah.
And an opportunity to impact when you receive that the right way, and then act on it, or at least listen, which a lot of times people aren't even willing to do, that are in your position. You have this promotion, you have this euphoric feeling. I think that we got engaged sometime the middle of this year, early fall, talking about the growth of the club, what you all are looking to do in Greater Christiansand. At some point, this evolved from owning a football club to kind of catalyzing a broader impact across Christiansand, and inclusive of infrastructure. And I know that there's been conversations we've had about the real estate around the stadium itself, upgrades there. When in your mind, maybe it was always part of the plan, or maybe initially you were just acquiring a club and looking to scale and grow that. When did this start to become larger than just a sports team investment? Kind of friends and family style from a group perspective, to what I've seen it to be here as of late, which is a much larger, seriously impactful infrastructure development project anchored with Start at the center.
Yeah. So, growing up, we all went to these stadiums that were, 45 minutes away, from
Yeah.
from the city, and there was just nothing going on out there. And all the economics and all the case studies, that I read as an economic undergrad, where, stadiums were not a good use of funds, public funds, private funds, because there was nothing, there's no economic driver to them, because they're just parking lots and concrete bowls. And that has completely changed, just totally flipped on its head. The stadiums are an anchor of cultural, civic, residential, entertainment spaces now, right? They are part and parcel to really interesting neighborhoods. You see what's going on in Atlanta, San Diego is another prime example. Pittsburgh, the whole, Pittsburgh stadiums were in the city, but they weren't really a vibrant neighborhood around it. And now it's just action packed around the stadiums. So when we landed, we were like, all right, we saw value in the club and value in the city and value in the area, and Norway, from a relatively calm political environment, right? Not a lot of hostility there. We're like, all right, there's opportunities here that if we get a couple of things right, we could potentially participate in. And that's what we saw. We're like, all right, let's work on this, like, kind of in the background. Let's get the club going. Our main focus is the club and will remain the club. It's the driver of it, but the stadium is held by the city primarily. The city has expressed that they're not really particularly interested in being the manager of a venue, a large stadium like this. So it makes sense from a usage perspective, from a landlord perspective, that we would try to figure out some way to have ownership of that, and that's our first step. And try to expose and find opportunities for us that benefit the club and the city.
We don't have to get into specifics, and I know these things are long processes, and there's a lot of moving parts and relationships, et cetera. So I won't ask you to talk specifics, but generally, from a return perspective or from an investment perspective, if we can go there for a minute, we've obviously at Momentous been very, very focused in a very strong, acute way on participating in franchises that have opportunity to develop, take control of stadiums, and then develop real estate around them. And we've seen that synergistic flywheel really creates significant momentum for the club, the local community, from a return perspective, et cetera, when it's done the right way. How has your evolution or thought around, and listen, I ask this question being very mindful of, the fans, they may be interested in kind of what's coming from a entertainment perspective, but they ultimately want you focused on the club, the success there, competing in your first season back up in the first division. But ultimately what you'd be doing for them, if you're able to bring the pieces together, is create a really special on the water entertainment destination for the city, for Norway as a whole, especially in the summer months. So I preface this question with all those things, but from a pure investment perspective, how have you thought about, wow, there's really an opportunity, for us to think about this in a different way than we may have at the beginning. And then you've seen kind of the narrative and storylines and some of the tailwinds of mixed use developments in the US. I think Europe is maybe just receiving those in a more meaningful way, in a broader way, where there'll be a lot of activity over the next 3 to 5 years and beyond. I live in Berlin. I recognize what Eastside Gallery, where Uber Arena is here in Berlin, is a big mixed use district.
That is quite a space, Uber Arena. Absolutely.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's changed Berlin, and if you compare that to Olympic Stadium, where Hertha plays, it's night and day, the fan experience by just going to a game or a match. So maybe just give me your general thoughts on kind of like that as a whole. Absolutely. That's obviously come into play in Christian's on.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with the club at the nucleus of it. And when you look at how can you create a sustainable club? How can you create a sustainable enterprise, both financially and sporting? Uh, you look at the larger, opportunity, right? And the neighborhood revitalization, working with private partners locally, working with the local and regional government and innovation offices there, the synergies are just fantastic, right? The If you can revitalize a neighborhood with the stadium and your sports club as the anchor tenant, it is only upside for the club.
Yeah.
And that boils down basically to that. Like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander kind of thing. Now, people want to be there. People want to go to the stadium, wherever the stadiums may be, and not just on match day. So that opportunity exists here. We saw that sort of at the beginning. We weren't anticipating, really looking into it for another year or so. But opportunities come, and when they come, you have to, look at them and be like, all right, we're ahead of schedule in a lot of ways, right? We're promoted. We're having discussions on the stadium and things of that nature. So we're excited with that potential, with the potential that we have, with the relationships that we have locally, from the local developers, the local property owners. And, we have a fantastic relationship with, local and regional government offices, which is so key. And that is a big trust relationship as well. And ultimately it starts from, the 2 o'clock in the morning pint with, the most ardent supporters who've been with the club from the very beginning, right? Because that's where you get the best information, the best perspective. And if you can do that, if you are able to make your way through those conversations, learn what you need to learn about how the club has been, what it really feels like from a diehard supporter perspective, then you can do this in a responsible, meaningful, and impactful way.
I think that's very well said and well framed, and obviously really important. I love the thought about talking to that supporter at 2 a.m. because that is really where you get the unfiltered, like, hey, here's our perspective of what the hell's going on
Right.
here, and you need to hear it from me.
Absolutely.
It goes back up to showing up and being willing to do that. Has this changed your thoughts? Like, have you thought about U.S. sports owners that maybe you look up to growing up and being in your seat now and understanding the pressures that come with it in the context that you're in? Like, has it changed your outlook at all of, the sports ownership landscape in the U.S., like what it takes to actually, execute on, these multi-billion-dollar franchise? Just always kind of curious how experience abroad may change somebody's perspective of what it takes in the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, I consume sports so differently. It's a
Yeah.
completely different experience, going to sporting events, even watching them on TV. Um, it it makes you appreciate the the seat of an operator, of an investor, um, so much more, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to criticize and to say, though, if I were there, this is how I would do it, and we're all guilty of that. And now we have the opportunity. We are there, right? We're sitting in that seat of an operator, of an investor, of a steward of this club, and it is a massive responsibility, right, to leave the club in a better spot than where you found it. And we're going to make mistakes. We've made plenty of mistakes, but I do find myself sympathizing with the ownership when it comes to some of the answers that they give, the questions that they're asked, um, because they're people, right? They've got feelings, right?
Yeah.
People may not like a certain owner. There's some owners that are much more contentious than others, but they care deeply about the club, and
Yeah.
more about the club than about the bottom line. I can promise you that. And to have that relationship with the club is so impactful, so meaningful. My life is certainly forever changed, and watching 2,000 people watch the promotion match live, from Oslo. I wasn't there; I was there the week before, but people crying and the euphoria to have had an opportunity to have played a small role in a moment like that in people's lives,
Yeah.
5,000 miles away. There's really nothing like it. It's so
It's hard to
humbling.
match.
Yeah. And it's, it's awesome. It really is. And I'll take that with me forever. And I'll forever be grateful to the folks over there that gave us this opportunity. And, yeah, I have a hard time watching the games though. I'm not gonna lie, Kyle. It's like I watch the game. Oh my God. It's like think about like
It's
you're a
tough if you're a
proxy.
former athlete and you have zero
Yeah,
control over what's going on down there.
totally. You're like, oh, cool. I had this like crazy parlay. Let's see if it works out.
That's good. That's good. Are there anything? Is there anything that's kind of top of mind that you think about from time to time, perhaps where let's maybe frame this within soccer, but you can comment on sports generally, but that the U.S. could be thinking about what Europe is doing or what happens in European soccer that should be or could be applied, and then the inverse with Europe thinking about some of what the ways that perhaps U.S. soccer clubs or sporting clubs are operated, monetized, et cetera. Like, is there any trading of notes that you think could be meaningful to both kind of regions?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a friend Adam Webb who owns a Scottish team called St. Johnstone, and he puts it really well. He's like, Europeans do fanaticism and the relationship with their club at a whole nother level, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a deep and meaningful and personal and generational um, attachment to the club.
Yeah.
The U.S., we don't quite have that level. Uh, Maybe it's because there are 3 or 4 different teams in each big city, right? So you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
spread your love around a little bit. Whereas in Europe, it's primarily there's one football club. There might be two in Manchester, for example. But what we do well in the U.S. is the fan experience, right? The
Yeah.
before after experience. It's what the American perspective, and I think this is a healthy perspective, is that this is an entertainment business, right? We
Yeah.
are responsible for entertaining the fans, and fans are entertained in various ways. Some entertained by, bad loss and, you know, moaning and bitching about it, and they enjoy that, right? That's certainly true. Some enjoy the euphoria of a win and don't really care about the losses, kind of roll off their back. And there's plenty of fans who are at the matches who maybe aren't sure what the score actually was, but had a good time. And if you can marry those two, right, marry that deep seated commitment and love of a club with a fan experience, then I think we're on to something. And you have to do that genuinely. You have to do that um, organically, right? So that's what we're hoping to do
I
ultimately.
agree. I agree. I agree. And I think you got to be looking at it that way. I think maybe one of the sports or connection points that are similar to Europe and the U.S. are college sports.
Yeah,
I grew up an
true.
Alabama fan.
Yeah,
My grandfather was at Alabama when Bear Bryant was there. I had cousins and the like played Alabama and Auburn. And like you walk into my grandparents' living room, and it was like a museum for Alabama. And then the family group WhatsApp chat or text messages pop off every week when Alabama's kicking off of the
yeah,
12 cousins and all the aunts and uncles. And so there is kind of like that,
true.
like
Yeah,
really sense of
I would agree with you. The
it
pageantry around
matters.
college, the pageantry around college sports does rival, you know, the
It
European
does.
football.
It does. Yeah. But
I
it
agree.
is still, there's still there's different twist here. you can tell it's ingrained in the DNA in a super
The
meaningful way.
flags, the flares, the
Yeah,
whole, the
yeah.
singing, the chanting, like that is special, right? And you can't manufacture that.
You can't. I would say that's probably one of the things that would be interesting to see in American sports is the fanaticism in the stands during the game. I recognize the way that football or soccer is played in the kind of constant motion, and the fans are a very big part of energizing the players and supporting
Absolutely.
them and being tough on the opponent. But that, like, when I go to a Hertha game here in Berlin and you kind of see that corner of 30, 25, 30,000 supporters that have the flares, that have the flags, like you don't experience stuff like that. At least that I've seen in the US that, if you're an American over here in Europe and want to take in a soccer match, you absolutely should
Yeah,
just to get that.
absolutely. And they own it, right? Those fans own it, and they're a huge part of the fabric of the club, right? And they take it very seriously, and it's great. Right? It's I grew up a Schalke fan, living in Germany, so I've been in the Zoot Kurva, right? So I know what that's like, and you have to create an environment where those fans are excited, right, and give them
Yeah,
something to believe in.
agreed. Let me get you out here. I got two last questions. Um, and I appreciate the openness and conversation to this point.
This podcast
I'm
could go on
catching
for four or
you.
5 hours, Kyle.
Yeah, I could. Very long time if we let it.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll get into the more longer format
right.
pods in the future. Um, I'm catching you with the dopamine of promotion right now, so forgive me, but you've had success. You've done it in Norway. How are you thinking? Is there something in the back of your head? Is there an itch where it's like, man, like, okay, we've got the exposure now. We've seen the inside of the organization and how they operate. We've seen what it's taken to have success on the pitch. You've got this momentum in the community. Maybe there's a way for us to do more beyond, start being the core priority, obviously, but there are multi-club groups out there that can be, if executed the right way, synergistic ways for multi-club groups to, for that ownership group to add value to all of their clubs. Have you started to think more about, like, hey, I like this, I want to do this more? You know, the the main focus is the main focus today, but I'm thinking about perhaps growing my exposure to the ownership of professional sports team in Europe, globally, soccer, more sports. Like, where's your head at there?
Well, as you can appreciate, there is a ton of inbound
I can
uh,
imagine.
coming across. Inbound for all kinds of interesting opportunities. We are solely focused on start. At the moment, that will be our main focus for the foreseeable future. Uh, but our mantra all along has been, we'll talk to anybody and everybody about anything and everything, right? And sometimes it's a short conversation and you don't have another one, and other times conversations grow into a podcast like this one, right? It was sort of a blind like call that we had originally. So there's a significant amount of inbound. There's a significant amount of opportunity in and around IK Start, and 3-4 years from now, you know you never know. I wouldn't shut the door on anything. Um,
Yeah.
but multi-club ownership is it's difficult to do it well. It's easy
It
to do
is
it poorly.
very, very.
So
I'm going to snip that clip, by the
yeah,
way. I'll make sure we use that. That's been my experience watching from the sidelines. We haven't invested in a multi-club ownership group, but we have looked at a handful. And there's a perspective that's offered that some can pull off, certainly, and others, struggle with when you're trying to align synergies amongst countries and various levels and
it
leagues.
comes down to local ownership of the process, right? I think the multi-club ownership groups that succeed, it's those who are decentralized, right? I think
Got it.
at the top, you can be centralized, obviously with sort of an overarching strategy perspective, but
Mm.
each club, needs to have its own space, its own breathing room. And um, I haven't done a ton of work and done looked into it. I've looked at clubs that are doing multi club ownership well, and you have to decentralize. It has to be a trust thing. You have to hire staff, for those clubs and let them operate the club as if they're an independent, business unit. Um,
Sure.
that's sort of my perspective on it, just from being involved with one club. And I even see that from our seat is that the more space that I give the staff that we have over there to do their job, the better the job is. I think when we first came in, if I've learned anything, it's like I had all these ideas, right?
Yeah.
It's really easy for me to call over there and be like, have this idea, check out this idea, do that idea. This is a great idea. And then none of the ideas go anywhere, right? You take a step back, like why have none of these ideas landed? Like we have no way to execute, right? Like, so the last few months have been, all right, if we come up with an idea before we take it to our staff on the ground, let's figure out how they could actually execute and if they could execute. And if they can't, we've asked them something impossible and it will frustrate them. So come up with something that's much more baked. Like, hey, this is the execution plan. This should be pretty easy to get off the ground and easy to get started. We've done 2 or 3 months worth of work on it. So just from a one club perspective, if you were trying to do that from a central command post across several clubs, I think that would be very challenging. But decentralizing is, in my opinion, the way that would work. But we're way away from that. We're focused on one club in Norway.
Got it.
With a ton of upside.
Yeah, a ton of upside. I totally agree with that. And I've seen, kind of behind the curtain firsthand. I think really one of the maybe my last question here, when like you've been promoted now, right? Well, I really have two questions. You've been promoted. You're thinking about and focusing on the business. Like what does it mean? A lot of people may know you go from the Division 2 to Division 1 in England. There's more media dollars, but there's more competition. You've got to have a bigger budget. You go from Division 1 to the Championship. It's really competitive, and then to the Premier League, obviously. Like everything just compounds. The pressure compounds. There's the elating moment of promotion, and then it's like, holy shit. Now is like everything that we've got to put together. Like, how has that process been? And like, I guess what are some of the core things that are different in the Norway league, whether it's, revenue levers from a media perspective, and if not, like, how are you processing that right now?
Yeah, we allowed ourselves about 2 weeks of like straight euphoria right before we, we're like, all right, like time to get back in your seat and do it. So there are, media share, 25% of Norwegian clubs qualify for European competition at some level, Champions, Europa, and Conference League, which is a lot. That's a long-term goal of ours, not a 2026 goal. We may catch
16 teams.
16 teams, yeah.
So four would
Four
qualify.
go. Yeah.
Wow.
High UEFA coefficient, right? Number 12 in UEFA. The national team is obviously very good. So catching Norwegian football at the right time, for sure. So media revenue is significant difference. Away fans, right? We attract a lot more away fans.
Yeah.
So that's very important. There are some logistical challenges that come along with that. As you know, away fans have their own entrances and exits, and depending on their reputation, may have an escort.
Sure. Yeah,
so
very, very aware of that here in Germany.
So that's fun. But ultimately, it does increase the pressure, but it increases the opportunity. the hardest thing is to get out until you promote, right? And then the hardest thing after promoting is actually staying there, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's no rest for the weary, right? It's sort of just find one more gear and work your way through all of your football networks to find opportunities. It's a fine line between rewarding the players that got you to where you are and fielding a club that is competitive with where you are now.
Do they know that?
I haven't asked them.
I'm always curious about that.
Yeah.
If you help a club get promoted, it's always been like there's a handful, right, that are talented based on the metrics how you deem how somebody's talented at that next level, but there are others that just aren't, right? And
right. Yeah.
what it is.
Some people, they reach their ceiling, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with having reached that ceiling. Yeah, but it's a fine line, and you don't know until you're competing against that next level, right?
Right.
That jump from the college to the pros. What does that look like? Some people are like, wow, that dude went to Western Kentucky, really, and now he's in the Pro Bowl as a rookie. Like, didn't see that coming, right? Sure. And there's a million first round draft picks that have fine careers, but aren't what everybody expects out of a first round draft pick. So you don't know until everybody's in that moment.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this here to wrap up. You're in an exciting time. You just mentioned that you're catching Norwegian football at the right time. For our audience, we have investors that are listening, other operators, subject matter experts, a number of various types of groups that participate in sports as an asset class. What is meaningful to you at this point in time relationally that you'd like to signal to the market? Or are you guys in a capital raise? Are you looking for capital? Is that something that you're interested in? What is it? How can people get in touch with you? I think that from what I've seen, and obviously we have a very acute, as I mentioned in the outset here, focus at Momentum Sports, and a lot of that is domestically right now. But I've been thoroughly impressed with what you guys have done. So who and how should people reach out to you? What are areas of interest for you at the moment?
Yeah. So, IK Start USA is our domestic website that people can reach out through. Okay. And we are always interested in conversations. Sports tech is very interesting. We have a few relationships with some startups that are looking to vet their technology.
Sure.
In soccer specifically, they've maybe come from other sports, but are looking to see what it looks like in soccer. So we have some interesting things going on there. Capital raising is always, part and parcel
Sure.
to any business, really. Like, you take a company public to raise capital, right? So,
right.
If people are
interested in things, you also think about raising capital.
Yeah, you get promoted. We get promoted. You're like, okay, cool. Like, what is the top line for this club, and what do we need to do to get to that point, right?
Right.
So we are certainly well aware of that, and I'm happy to take any inbound or people who are interested who've been kicking the can. I've talked to some larger institutions who are like, oh, we've been looking at clubs for 10 years. We haven't pulled the trigger yet. That at some point you just have to pull the trigger, right? You're saying I'm in or I'm out. And, some folks may want to come into something that's underway like we have, and maybe more passive or maybe more an observational role to kind of see behind the curtain a little bit, like the brass tacks of making sure there's toilet paper in the bathrooms, that kind of thing. And be like, okay, I've learned, I'm prepared, I'm ready to maybe take a much larger responsibility at some club somewhere.
Got it.
And we started at that point, but that's okay.
Sure. I mean, and it is, last thing I'll say here is it is very interesting. Like, there's the sporting component. I'm talking through the lens of investment, right? Whether you're working for an investment firm, whether you're a private equity group, an ultra high net worth or high net worth individual just allocating because you're passionate about sports and you want some diversified exposure into an asset class that's uncorrelated and, in my opinion, a hedge against AI with the live entertainment.
That's a very good point.
Likely enhanced by AI from a fan
Absolutely.
experience perspective more than
For
anything
sure.
else.
When you look at AI and live sports, like we have a unique opportunity that people can only consume live. It is the most meaningful live, and it is unencumbered by AI. It's only possibly enhanced by AI, and you can't binge watch it. You can't record it. You can record it and pretend and not find out the result, but it's damn near impossible.
It's hard. Okay, so here's where I was going with that. There's this unique element when you're investing abroad. It becomes this joy, in my opinion, that's added to life because you now have. It's almost like destination investing to an extent. Like your life is changed by having this asset that you're participating in abroad. That you can go over and visit a handful of time a year. You build incredibly new relationships. I think that is one of the things, like from my selfish seat, that is exciting, energizing, that I draw joy from in this space is that there is such this incredible experience on the other side of participating in a professional sports franchise, no matter where it's at, no matter the level, but in particular in unbelievable cities here in Europe. Just curious to your thoughts of that, or if you had a comment on that, because I think investors, you should always be thinking about your return, or you should be thinking about mitigating risk, right? No matter what.
Absolutely.
But then there's the layers on top of it. Like, this is freaking awesome. This is so fun. And I'm in Norway part of the year.
Right. Totally. That's probably the main diligence that you do is this a place that I want to spend time? Are these people that I want to spend time with? And is this a place where I would like to put some capital, right?
Right.
The club kind of to the side, right? The answer to those questions have to be yes before you even bother looking at the club.
Right. Totally agree. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate you joining us here on the podcast. Again, congratulations on the success.
Yeah.
I wish you continued success. We'll be watching very, very closely to the exciting things that are happening in the city, with the stadium, around the stadium, with the club. I think you're probably our first guest that's been successfully promoted. You definitely are. So it's been fantastic to follow you. We will be watching. When does the season start in Norway? For
March
our audience,
14th.
March.
We start March 14th, a little earlier than normal this year because of the World Cup.
Got it. Well, we'll be paying attention from our end. Again, appreciate the context. We'll put Roger's information, or at least social handles, or the website, the US-based website, in the comment section below for people to know how to get in touch with Roger. But listen, man, we really appreciate it.
I appreciate the invite, Kyle. I always enjoy
absolutely.
our conversations.
Absolutely. And so do I. And again, hopefully I'll find my way up to Christiansen sometime this summer to take in a match with you.
Awesome. Sounds good.
All right, Roger. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Kyle. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to our first Momentous Sports podcast of the year. We'd love and appreciate if you'd subscribe to our pod here on YouTube or on Spotify, wherever you may be listening. Please feel free to follow us on all of our social channels. We really are looking to put out content that's entertaining, that's interesting, that's informational as it relates to the asset class of sports. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Twitter, or X. Another exciting podcast next week, one that I'm really looking forward to, with Josie Altidore, former U.S. men's national team player and now avid sports investor. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next time.